First of all, thank you again for being here. It's really sweet of you to take the time. I'm curious how you got the idea to synthesize the sort of therapeutic inner work with the dance that you studied.
Oh, that's an interesting question because it never felt like an idea. It
Mm,
felt like a discovery of what's already there.
mm,
That it's really clear to me that our movements, when we're not doing choreographed movement, because I started teaching jazz dance and I was an aerobics instructor, so I started movement from a choreographed structure. And when I came to Esalen, I met Anna Halprin and Gabrielle Roth, and it kind of just blew that open for me into, oh, there's a whole world of creative, expressive movement that doesn't have to do with getting the steps right or performing or something like that. It's much more to do with our internal state. So in watching what happens for myself and others as you move, as you follow, as you listen, as you open to what's happening, it's very clear that our movements are not random. We're expressing our internal stories, our history. We're expressing our innate wisdom towards what's next, what needs to be next, what wants to be next, what wants to unfold, the path of our creativity. It felt to me like that was just obvious. And then those are all important therapeutic questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? And where am I going?
mm. That makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying it was a very natural blend that
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily strategized, but sort of came to be naturally through your being.
And I had the good fortune of being at Esalen Institute, where I was just bathed in a wealth of these amazing teachers of all kinds, not only all the Gestalt background, all the bodywork background, all the spiritual background, the psychotherapeutic background. So it was both what I saw and what I was being bathed in from
Mm,
every direction. So
that makes sense. How, when someone asks you what is open floor, what definition do you give them, if any?
uh, well, I think open floor is every teacher would give a different definition based on what their experience is. Bottom line, it's an embodiment practice based in movement. I mean, bottom line is that it's an embodiment practice based in movement, based on physical resources for physical, emotional, mental, spiritual health and well-being. That would be the bottom line. And then different teachers come with different interests or backgrounds, skill. I happen to be a psychotherapist, so I've always stood kind of one leg in the realm of psychology and one realm in of the body. But other teachers come as artists, as spiritual teachers from the shamanic tradition,
Mm,
um, from education, and they might use that embodiment language in a different way, like they would orchestrate the practice
mm,
to support whatever it is they're trying to support. I tend to want to support people's well-being and mental stability and creativity and spiritual development. I would say those are my uh, interests and focus.
mm. Yeah, makes sense. Would you describe yourself as being someone who's deeply involved in the research and practice of spirituality?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't see spirituality being any separate in any way from my psychology, from my embodiment, from my cognition. It's like it all feels one net
Mm,
to me. And that in the open floor, we really speak about it as one net. I don't consider myself a spiritual teacher in any way. I don't come from any lineage of sorts.
Mhm.
Um, but I do see that embodiment opens us up to spiritual experience. It opens us up and gives us the grounding and the support we need so that we can experience a bigger version of ourselves, if you will, or access experiences that are beyond just the personal, the transpersonal. So I think that the movement, particularly, because movement in music, as you must know, it creates transcendent experience. It just does. That's why we love music. We love dance because it does transcend the ordinary or the normal.
Mm,
So it's right there.
right. Yeah. What I noticed when I was doing your open floor practice for the first time, I found that so quickly that took me to the edges, the boundaries of my own psychology, where I was very quickly confronting experiences such as shame and self-consciousness. But I found that to be such a positive experience because in that holding container, I felt like, oh yeah, this is the cutting edge of what I need to be working on. And I was so
Mhm.
fascinated how whereas some talk therapies might in some situations lend themselves towards people being a little bit more verbal cognitive with confronting their challenges. I found that when I was doing your work, I would be able to identify my internal barriers very quickly on a mental level, but then also because I was moving and interacting with people, I also instantly had to put that recognition into work and actually like I was going out and practicing. Okay, I feel this shame, and now I have to kind of confront it in the real world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting to hear your experiences because you articulate in such kind of in a kind of a personal, everyday way of what I have a lot of internal language for as a teacher of the work.
Mm,
So it's nice to hear the languages come together. One of the words that you said that is really valuable to me and that I think of a lot when I'm teaching is play.
mm,
We are creatures that learn
mm,
through play. We always have. You look at children, they will learn best if it's playful, if it's fun, if it's engaging, if it's doing something, and there's not going to be a big consequence if they get it wrong. There's just this experimenting.
mm,
And I feel like psychology or therapeutic work can really benefit from that. We really benefit when we put ourselves in a situation where we're resourced,
mm,
right? We're resourced. We have something to work with inside of ourselves, and we can just play. We get to try things out. There's some awareness. Here's some tools, and now play with it. See what you find out. Tell me about that. Did
mm,
you try this? Did you try that? Could you have tried that? What prevented you from trying that? So, and also the feedback of others. So often therapy is done alone
mm,
or with a therapist in a room, but you don't get that sense of playing or practicing or seeing kind of what happens in the moment.
mm. Yeah.
Whereas in a movement class, you really have that opportunity. You have that consent from other players, right? Other movers. It's like, okay, we're here for a conscious movement experience. We are going to practice. We're going to play. And there's so much that we learn from that innate wisdom I was talking about, from that kind of bottom up wisdom that isn't just our thoughts or what we should do or what we were told to do or what we read might be possible, but just that kind of creative navigating of our world that is just such a delight.
Mm,
Again, we see it in our children, we see it.
right.
That's when we're happy too. That's when we tend to be happy when we're playing.
Absolutely. It's something that has in in my short experience with your work has already been such a blessing because I think it's easy to default when doing therapeutic work into a sort of seriousness. Like, okay, I've come here to address my shadow side. and we will now deeply
My problems,
yeah.
all my problems, I have to resolve them, you know. And yeah, of course we want to resolve them, but if we don't resolve them with coming to the table with something good in us, it's hard. And often what the good is in talk therapy is the relationship with the therapist, which is hugely valuable. And I
Mm,
don't mean to in any way diminish that, because I think that relationship is powerful.
mm,
And it's not that accessible to everybody to go into individual therapy, nor for many reasons, it's not accessible. And the relationship with the therapist is not the only quote therapeutic relationship we could have. You know, in a group experience, there's lots of, you know, with the intention and with the setting, lots of people can provide a mirror for you.
mm,
Oh, you just walked away from me and that felt bad.
mm.
You know, oh,
Right. Yeah, it's incredible. The word that's coming to me is instant feedback. So
yeah,
instead,
right,
instead
right.
of needing to talk about my issues, identify them, and then wait till the next relevant moment where my partner says the thing that triggered me, and now I get to use what I practiced. It's like,
And hope that you remember, right? You gotta hope that your body remembers that, because normally what your body will do is whatever it's used to doing.
right. If I describe your work as therapy through movement, what would you say to that? Would you, in terms of accuracy?
I would say that's accurate.
Hmm,
It's just not the full scope of what I feel I'm up to, but
sure.
I definitely feel that I am holding and directing or eliciting the therapeutic aspects of a movement practice,
Hmm,
of a conscious movement practice. But I could also elicit the spiritual dimensions.
hmm,
I could also elicit the creative, kind of soulful dimensions, like what, you know, so many times we have artists or musicians or poets, or, you know, people who really are working on their creative selves. And that's another particular angle of like, how do we open up the boxes there and provide, you know, that good embodied support so that they can really follow into areas of their own psyche that they haven't looked into yet or hadn't even thought to look into. Or,
hmm,
so, and yes, I come from a family of therapists. I really do value
hmm,
therapy. I value it because I've needed it in my life. I've really needed a way to stabilize myself, my emotional world, my relationships. I've benefited greatly from all of the therapeutic relationships I've had, whether it was in group or in individual. So I hold that dear
hmm,
in my work.
hmm. Yeah, I love that expansion that you added of not just eliciting necessarily a therapeutic side, but also potentially helping inspire people's artistic creativity or other forms of creativity, and the spiritual dimension is such an interesting one too. I'm curious to understand for myself more, and for those listening, if you could delineate a little bit of the difference between your work and Five Rhythms work, and maybe in addition to that, there's also the word ecstatic dance that's been very popular and
Right,
around
right.
really, and to really understand how you define your work in contrast and in comparison to those.
Right, great questions, because these, you know, as the field emerges, all of these different kind of strands of conscious dance, which is even a word that I'm not thrilled with, but it has emerged in the field as being kind of the most inclusive
Mm,
of ecstatic dance, or uh, more conscious oriented exercise, I guess you would call it that, like Nia or um, so having been, I was a five rhythms teacher for 30 years. So I'm not a five rhythms teacher. It's like that door never closed because that door is in my body, in every cell. I feel like what I did is I shifted my language. I shifted the language I wanted to use in terms of how I articulate what I do. And I wanted a broader language for our embodied experience. The five rhythms, you have five practice, you have five rhythms as your language. And I never got tired of that ever, 30 years. And there's always so much to explore there. And at the same time, it felt to me like it started to get patterned. It started to get rote. First we do this, and then we do this. And as I watched people's bodies, regardless of the music I would play, that pattern started to get set in there. And I thought, I would like, from that therapeutic aspect, I wanted a wider range of, so I wasn't telling him what rhythm we were doing, what rhythm was coming. I wanted them to, for my students to feel the music, feel their experience, whether they're in partnership or dancing, what's actually happening from inside of them, what's really happening. So I wasn't putting a structure on them. That said, even just being in the room, there's going to be a structure. Every piece of music offers a structure. But if as a theory or a practice, I didn't have this, it seems to really have opened up a lot for me and for the students. So that I would say that would be one reason I made that shift. Yeah. And also, the ecstatic dance world, I think it kind of comes into that rock and roll dance, just a sense of freedom, the beautiful sense of freedom that, the baby boomers all loved. And, like, that's great. And, feeling like, yeah, I came from that tradition as well. But what I wanted was I wanted more self-responsibility, more consciousness, more sense of actually being present. Like, I know what it is to dance and just bliss out. That's a beautiful thing. That's a fun thing. That's not exactly what I'm after. I'm more, let's go in and let's go in and meet what's there. And often in meeting what's there is that altered state of transcending just my own personal patterns, my own personal thoughts, my own inhibitions. I just get into that flow state, that beautiful flow state, which is a little bit different than kind of just blissing out. There's that sense of coming into something that is rich and timeless, endless. And you're a part of it, and if we're staying really present to it, if we're staying really awake to those moments, you start to track how does it happen? How do I make that pathway a little bit more of my normal life?
Yeah, it's awesome to feel that distinction of the inner focus and that being so integral to the work. And it's with that as the intention. It was so interesting for me to experience the feedback between my body and my mind, and using that as a reference point for understanding myself better. For example, feeling like, oh, I feel embarrassed to move this part of my body a certain way, perhaps as a man, to feel like I can really get swinging with my hips and stuff like that. That tells me something about my own psychology, and it also reflects in the fact that, like, my hips are quite tight. And
right.
So in that way, it's sort of almost reminds me of a dynamic version of Gestalt inquiry, which is so it really uses the body as an entry point to inquire, as I'm sure you've studied
Right.
a fair bit.
A- And that's where, for me, the title of Open Floor came from. That was the name of my work for many years. And then when I left the Five Rhythms, I thought, oh, it could be a bigger umbrella, but it really came from having done so many open seats, like
Mm,
just endless. Being at Esalen, that's normal weekly thing you do.
mm,
And loving the open seat, loving that sense of being able to show up and have someone facilitate me wherever I am, or to be in the presence of somebody who is getting that kind of opportunity. Uh, but for me, I didn't want it to be a seat. I wanted it to be a floor. I
mm.
wanted there to be more possibility because I'm a mover. I'm a dancer. I can sit there, but it felt like I was missing something if I didn't have all of my body to play with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the phrase or the title Open Floor came from. It's from an extension of Open Seat.
Mm. That's so cool. I never knew that. And for those listening who maybe aren't aware what open seat is, it's basically something that was practiced at Esalen, a form of inquiry where people come together normally with a facilitator and do self-inquiry as a group. And so you expanded that into a not a sitting but a moving exploration, which is
Right.
adds such depth. And
Yeah.
you know, wow. I'm
Yeah.
curious, you have a unique history in that you've been at Esalen since what some might say the good old days. And although when I talked to my dad, who was there at a similar time, he says, the good old days are always like a decade earlier, depending on who you ask. But
So true, isn't it? It's really true. The good old days is when you were in your 30s or 20s and
yeah,
you had felt that certain, the world is just opening for me and this is just magical, right? Whatever decade that is for you, those are your good old days.
right. I'm curious what Esalen was like when you first arrived, and also what impact learning and growing at Esalen had on your work.
Mm. Mm. I was curious, I could ask you the same question.
Good.
Totally from a totally different generation.
Mm,
Um, for me, I think Esalen really saved my life. It was an institution in the best sense of the word for me. I
mm,
came in a very broken state. I was in a deep state of fragmentation. My mother had just died. My family just broke up. I was 17 years old. I had no money. No, I had nothing, no clue where to put myself. Thank the stars, my father sent me there. I felt like I was just kind of dropped off. They were like, okay, now what do I do? And I learned what to do. I really learned so many skills. I had the opportunity to meet with so many inspirational teachers, and I was held in a really safe way, in a really magical way, in a really amazing sacred piece of land.
mm,
I've made lifelong friends. My first husband, I married there. My second husband, I married there. My child was born there. My very best teachers all came from there. My father was taught there since 1960. I first went there when I was 8 years old. So it's very much like a childhood home for me, as well as my college days. What normal people would, in fact, it was my college day. I wrote up all my courses and got my BA from there. That's how I got my original BA.
mm,
So I would just say I owe Esalen a great deal of thanks. That's my experience. And then there's kind of what I saw happening there, but my own personal experience was one of deep holding and healing and grace.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's lovely. Can you name some of maybe the top two or three most influential teachers that you worked with?
Mhm. Well, Dick and Chris Price, absolutely. Dick and Chris Price,
Mm,
who were, Dick was the founder and who originally brought Gestalt from a therapeutic perspective to a more spiritual practice or community practice.
mm,
So, decades of that kind of support and training. Um, from the movement perspective, I would say Anna Halprin and Gabrielle Roth were my two main teachers,
mm.
and through that Daria Halprin as well. Emily Conrad, also, a lot of late nights there with Emily Conrad. I mean, such gifted teachers. Bodywork. I was on the massage crew for decades.
Oh, wow.
And to learn to be with bodies of all sorts, of all kinds, as a young woman, to be touching all these different kinds of bodies and to feel safe in doing that, to feel like I could offer something, that I had a skill that I could communicate through my hands, and a sense of learning and listening to our psychology through the body. So, the good old Vicky Top, Brita Ostrom, and Peggy Horan, and my former husband, Dean Juhan, were amazing teachers for me in Bodywork. Well,
Mm,
and Al Drucker, Perry and I, your father and I shared him as a teacher as well, Al Drucker.
yeah, my dad speaks so highly of Al, and
Yeah,
I was curious what his influence was on you, like what you felt like you primarily learned from him.
that's funny. I don't think anybody's asked me. You can ask because you know your father's experience. Um, I think I learned because he groomed us through the whole Rolfing
Mm,
10 sessions, and every session what it was about. And so I learned a massive amount around anatomy and tissue structure and change. I learned a lot about momentum, weight, gravity, all that kind of stuff of like how a body moves, how a body can move, about pain, about pleasure,
mm,
because if you're working deeply, people, it hurts.
yeah.
So, you don't want to hurt people, but the body will open if it's hurting. So how do you manage to deepen into a physical system and lean towards the pleasure so
Mm,
that the pain, so that we can, these kinds of things I learned. And also Al was very devoted. He had a very strong spiritual practice. I don't know if you would call it Hindu. I think it was probably Hindu.
mm,
But we did, it was my kind of early opening into religious, spiritual practices that were not of my culture,
sure.
you know. And all the chants we learned and the meditations we did came from, I was like, okay, I was young. I was like, okay, I'll do this and learn about this. And it was very opening. It was just opening. I don't think I became a devotee, but I definitely took it in as as wealth, as wealth.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so incredible to just hear, uh, almost like this laundry list of all stars who you got to study with, and it makes me wonder as well. You mentioned you kind of got dropped off at Esalen when you were 17, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious to understand a little bit more, maybe like an abridged version of how you went from 17-year-old woman getting dropped off at Esalen to then finding your way into movement, figuring out what you like and don't like, and eventually becoming a teacher. Like how did you start? I know my dad, when he got there, he was washing dishes for a year or two before he ever started learning about massage. So I'd love to know maybe your.
Yes, I remember him washing dishes. Yeah, no, I did not have the washing dishes job, but I started. Um, I bonded very quickly and just kind of crawled into her lap. Janet Letterman, who was the director of Gazebo, the originator of Gazebo, which is the early childhood education. And I think she just took pity on me and just kind of took me under her wing and realized I didn't have the means to be like a work study one or two. These were all these categories. And she just kind of said, okay, she's with me. And I got to work at Gazebo. And that was, my love of children and learning how children learn. There was a lot of reparenting that happened for me in that space. And she helped a lot, help me kind of relearn myself. Between that and Dick and Chris Price, I could kind of relearn how to navigate myself.
Mm.
And then I branched from the Gazebo, and I was all that time I was teaching. What was there was a name for it. Well, I had jazz dance. There was this wonderful Italian teacher that came through, Paul Stefan, and we started dancing jazz dance. And I went to Italy, once a year to study with him and his troupe and bring it back to Esalen, of all places, right? Esalen. It's fun and it was crazy. So I had all this dance experience in the Gazebo, and then I started learning massage. Janet Letterman, she finally kicked me out of Gazebo. She says, "Okay, enough. Go do something else." And I loved the massage. I loved the baths.
Mm.
Um, the man I was seeing then was a massage group person that just kind of worked in. So then I was on the massage group for a long time, and that's where I started bringing Al Drucker. And then I realized through my father, people would relax so beautifully on the table. They would just like bliss out on the table. And then I would see them later in the lodge. I'm like, I just worked on those shoulders and you have them up in your ears again. I'm like, what the heck?
Mm.
And it started to become just so clear that I needed more participation from the person. I could do it for them, which is always helpful, I think. I love massage, but I needed more participation. And that's where I started to get more interested in psychology,
Mm.
more interested. And I worked and studied with my father. I did my BA, I did my MA. Much later, I did my doctoral work in this field.
Mm.
Um, but my father's very academically inclined, and I don't think I was going to get away with just being an SLA. He was always like, "Well, when are you getting your degree?" And I was like, so I was lucky enough in those years you could find ways to do extended learning. What we would call Zoom learning now, but I would go down to UCLA for periods of time, come back to Big Sur, go up to San Francisco, come back to Big Sur. So that's how I got my education, was kind
Mm.
of mixing and matching through institutions and creating a degree path for myself.
Interesting. Yeah. What you mentioned that really resonated with me was the feeling of wanting active participation from the people you were doing body work on. And what spoke to me about that was in the style of coaching that I do, the first form that I was trained in, the main emphasis was never give anyone advice, but rather create a container for
Good.
in which they can basically we use clever open-ended questions to get people to answer their own questions, and seeing them rather than telling them like, oh, this is what you have to do based on your problem, having them be like, this is what I have to do based on my own problem, just stuck like 10 times deeper and was so much more
Right.
transformative. And it's almost like you experienced the physical manifestation of that, and we're like, oh, maybe if I got them moving or involved in this process more directly, then that would benefit them more psychologically and physically. So it's just interesting to see that therapeutic concept carry over. And
Yeah. What style of coaching did you learn?
so the first style that I was trained in is called availability coaching.
Oh, great
And
name.
that was from one of my friends developed it based on various styles that he had been trained in. And basically the whole premise on day one was essentially accept that you don't know what is right for the person you're working with, which to me at the time was such a ego rub, because I was like, I'm doing this coaching because I do know what's right for people. And I've
Oh, yeah.
you know but then I realized that the whole punchline was, it's not about us giving people advice, it's about helping people discover their own inner resources and their heart's wisdom, such that they find their own answers within. And so that's what I learned from that. And then I also later got trained by my parents in Gestalt coaching, because they started doing their IGC, integrative Gestalt coaching training. And so yeah, that's where my background is. And
Yeah.
it seems like your work is so aligned, and it's just exciting to see those parallels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. We're so trained in our culture that we're supposed to know something, that particularly as a professional, we're supposed to know something. We're supposed to come with our bag and we're going to, tricks, and we're going to solve somebody's problem. And that discovery of even if we are right, we have the right idea for someone, or the right path, or the right understanding of what's in their way. It doesn't matter. If they don't know it, it doesn't matter what we know.
Right,
It's still useless to them.
right.
So,
Yeah. I'm very curious what you feel like right now the cutting edge of your work is. And to give that question a little bit of context, for example, my mom studies in and teaches the Ridwan school with
yeah.
Hamid, and she often mentions that Hamid and Karen, the two main teachers of that spiritual school, will say the things that they're teaching the students are sometimes several years ahead of what their current cutting edge inner practice is. And they feel like they kind of need to digest their information and then give what feels relevant to the students, and there's often a gap in those two things. And I'm curious what your experience is with that, like where you are in terms of your open floor work with your own inner frontier exploration, and where it's at with how you actually teach it to people.
That was well said. I like how you framed that as teachers, we have the Gestalt saying is like, we're always teaching what we need to learn, but there is a bit of a gap there. I like what you said, that as teachers, we're maybe a few steps ahead learning something, and then we're finding good ways to teach it. And then we teach ourselves how to teach it even better. And then that propels us a little bit forward. Um, I notice feeling a little vulnerability in the question. Uh, that sense of, for myself, I realized that I had this worry that I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be stuck in the psychological all my life because I have so many issues, or I'm so sensitive, or I'm oversensitive, or I thought, I'm never going to be a spiritual being. I'm never going to evolve. I just going to be stuck in this kind of body psychology. And thankfully, as I age, as life cycles turn, and I really do resolve some things and get better footing for myself, the spiritual dimension of my own being is much more available. The spiritual dimension, in not guess I had a real, and this comes from Esalen too, I had a real woo-woo aversion. I
Mm,
was like, I just couldn't handle it. Like people do what we now would call spiritual bypassing. Um, there was a lot of that all through the 70s and 80s and 90s. There still is, in the new age field. And I had a real aversion to that. So I just always solidly put myself in the realm of psychology, body.
mm,
I'm getting over that. I'm not, I still probably have a woo-woo aversion, but I noticed that that's not getting in the way of my own embrace of my own spirituality, my own sense of myself as a divine being, my own sense of myself as interconnected with everything,
mm,
with a larger field. Um, and as I get older, and the more I teach, the more students I, hold, I really see that as a culture, as humanity, we need that. We need that stretch.
mm,
It doesn't matter if we each resolve our own internal problems if we can't come together and solve the global problems.
mm,
It's imminent. We need that stretch to come together, to be with difference, to have compassion for others, to be a bigger people, to sit in our wisest, biggest selves, and whatever that means. And I'm much more available for that teaching. I'm much more available to guide people there. I'm much more, I feel I have more skill of how to build that ground from the body through psychology, looking through our emotional patterns, looking through our cognitive beliefs, interpretations, identities that we have, and kind of finding our way there. It's been a long journey for me, but I find that's much more where I'm sitting now.
mm,
Um, is not how to get beyond ourselves, but how to expand, uh, how to transcend separateness, basically, how not to feel ourselves as so separate.
mm. Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that the frontier of your inner exploration has really been allowing more of that the spiritual dimension to come in and to allow it to be sort of a natural extension, not as a separate realm that you're entering into, but expanding your identity as an embodied individual as meaning more than just being in a physical vehicle, but also being
Right. Yeah.
beyond.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's exactly why I love sitting down and talking with people like you, is because there there's so much power in that teaching. That's such a deep portal. And I lately have been on this kick of really, really appreciating teachers who are able to be ambassadors of both worlds, so to speak. Of
Mhm.
uh, for so long, I studied Eastern non-duality and found myself also feeling very wise, but then when shit would hit the fan, I'd be like, oh, I want to curl up on my parents' leg, because I wasn't actually very embodied. And I really appreciate how your work really encourages people to explore and embody at the same time. And it's just a beautiful gift that you bring to the world. And I'm super grateful and excited to hopefully through this in my small way contribute that to a larger audience. So yeah, thank you
Oh,
for the beautiful dance exploration you guided me through, and I look forward to hopefully attending more and learning more of your work.
yeah.
Mm,
Oh, thank you, Nika. It's just a joy to speak with you, to feel that resonance with you.
mm.
Um, in a different generation, and just to feel like, oh, you really, you know what I'm talking about.
Uh,
And it's so lovely to feel. And I appreciate you inviting me
oh
to talk,
yeah,
to share. Yeah.
one thing that I think could be sweet to leave on is how people might be able to use some of the principles of what you do and apply them into their daily life today to start to maybe get a feel for what it means to embody a little bit more in a way that you would recommend.
Hmm. It's interesting. We didn't talk much about music, but I think music is such an easy doorway
Mm,
into all levels of our being.
mhm,
And music moves us, it moves our bodies, it moves our hearts, right? That's why, you have a soundtrack to a movie. Without it, you don't follow the story, really. The music is the story, and you have church choirs. It brings the spirit. So I feel like sometimes we listen to music maybe to distract ourselves, or it's just in the background, which I hate in our culture, that it's just like in every bathroom or train station or supermarket. It's like it takes away the value. But something that I would say is if you're struggling with yourself, like if you're in some kind of mood, you're in a blue mood, play blues. If you're in a sad mood, play some strings. If you're in a happy mood, find some good salsa music, or find music that matches your mood, because it will start to include your body
mm,
if you let it, just wash the clothes with the blues, and just start to, rather than go away from what we feel in our body, using music to kind of just enter it and give ourselves company with what we feel. And music is kind of it's like a therapist. It's the best therapist I've ever found.
mm,
Uh, just kind of keep ourselves company so that we learn to tolerate what we feel rather than escape what we feel. So
mm,
that's what I would say, is find music that matches your mood and
mm.
indulge yourself there.
Yeah. Oh, that's rich. I love that. Oh, Andrea, it's been so lovely. Thank you
Mm.
for taking
You
the
are so welcome. And please come to any group. You can be my guest. Any group I ever do at Esalen, if you can find a way to get there, come, be my guest. You are welcome on my dance floor.